Youngsters who suffer head impacts in sports like rugby and American football undergo changes in their brains after a single season, say scientists. Scans of high school American footballer players aged under 18 found alterations in the gray and white matter in their brains that had been caused by the collisions. Researchers said the findings related to all contact sports, and it is now important to discover if there are long-term effects. Texas University researcher Dr. Elizabeth Davenport said, "It's important to understand the potential changes occurring in the brain related to youth contact sports. We know some professional American football players suffer from a serious condition called chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE. We're attempting to find out when and how that process starts so that we can keep sports a healthy activity for millions of children and adolescents." CTE is a progressive degenerative disease of the brain found in athletes with a history of concussions. It has been known to affect boxers since the 1920s and can lead to dementia in later life. Cases of CTE have been noted in players from a number of contact sports including rugby, American football and ice hockey. The study presented at a Radiological Society of North America conference in Chicago included 24 players from a high school American football team in North Carolina. Each participant wore a helmet outfitted with the head impact telemetry system during all practices and games. The helmets are lined with 6 accelerometers, or sensors, that measure the location and direction of a hit as well as its strength. Data from the helmet can be uploaded to a computer for analysis. Dr. Davenport said, "We saw changes in these young players' brains on both structural and functional imaging after a single season of football. Before and after the season, each player underwent specialized MRI scans. From these, researchers were able to gather neuroimaging data in order to measure structural changes in the brain's white matter. A MEG scan also used to measure brain activity." Dr. Davenport said, "MEG can be used to measure delta waves in the brain, which are a type of distress signal. Delta waves represent slow wave activity that increases after brain injuries. The delta waves we saw came from the surface of the brain, while diffusion imaging is a measure of the white matter deeper in the brain." The researchers calculated the changes in the data between pre- and post-season scans. The imaging results were then combined with impact data from each of the players' sensor-laden smart helmets. None of the 24 players were diagnosed with a concussion during the study. Players with greater exposure to head impacts had the greatest change in structural changes to the white matter and brain activity between the two scans. Dr. Davenport said, "Change in diffusion imaging metrics correlated most to linear acceleration, similar to the impact of a car crash. MEG changes correlated most to rotational impact, similar to a boxer's punch." These results demonstrate you need both imaging metrics to assess impact exposure because they correlate with very different biomechanical processes. Dr. Davenport said similar studies are being conducted this autumn and a consortium has been formed to continue the brain imaging research in youth contact sports across the country. Across the U.S. without a larger population that is closely followed in a longitudinal study, it's difficult to know the long-term effects of these changes. We don't know if the brain's developmental trajectory is altered or if the off-season time allows for the brain to return to normal. In March, more than 70 doctors and academics signed an open letter to UK ministers saying injuries from rugby can have lifelong consequences for children. They said 2/3 of injuries in youth rugby and most concussions are down to tackles and urged schools to move to touch and non-contact rugby. A 7-year program headed by the Rugby Football Union is on target to introduce rugby to 1 million children in state schools across England. The RFU's program, which began in 2012 and is running until 2019, has so far reached 400 schools with 350 to follow.